The silence in Elliot Dalton's $10 million penthouse was more damning than any scream. Outside the city of Chicago glittered like a carpet of fallen stars, a universe he had conquered. He was the architect of Nexus AI, a man whose predictions shaped markets and whose decisions toppled corporate giants. Yet within the sterile perfection of his glass-walled home, he was a man on the verge of a single catastrophic miscalculation. His pregnant wife, Sophie, believed their future was as bright and limitless as that city view. What she didn't know was that her husband's heart had already been stolen by another woman, and the choice he was about to make would unleash a tragedy so profound it would echo through the rest of his hollow, gilded life. Elliot Dalton lived a life curated for magazine covers. At 38, he possessed the kind of sharp, restless intelligence that had allowed him to build Nexus AI from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. His suits were bespoke, his watches were Swiss, and his penthouse overlooking Lincoln Park was a monument to minimalist wealth. Everything in his life was optimized, efficient, and under his absolute control. Everything, it seemed, except for the gnawing emptiness that had taken root in his soul. His wife, Sophie, was the graceful anchor to his chaotic ambition. A former art historian with a kind smile and eyes that saw the good in everyone, she was the epitome of class and warmth. They had met at a university fundraiser where he was the celebrated donor, and she was the passionate curator. He was captivated by her quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the aggressive transactional relationships he was used to. Marrying her felt like the final perfect acquisition. She humanized his brand, softened his public image, and gave his sprawling apartment the feeling of a home. Now she was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son. The nursery was a symphony of soft grays and blues. The tiny clothes were folded with loving precision, and Sophie herself seemed to glow with a serene, maternal light. This should have been the pinnacle of his achievements, the personal validation of his success. Instead, he felt a rising tide of panic. The life he had built, once a source of pride, now felt like a beautifully constructed cage. The dinner parties with other tech titans, the charity galas, the weekend trips to their lake house, it was all a predictable loop. Sophie's conversations, once enchanting, now revolved around obstetrician appointments, birthing plans, and the merits of different stroller brands. He loved her, or at least he loved the idea of her. But the reality felt suffocating. The impending arrival of his son didn't feel like a joyous beginning, but like the final lock clicking shut on a life of predictable responsibility. The crack in his perfect world appeared on a Tuesday evening in May. It was a fundraising gala for the Museum of Contemporary Art, an event he usually endured with polite detachment. But that night he met Kendra Munro. Kendra was not a guest. She was the event's featured artist, a painter known for her bold, chaotic, and vaguely violent abstract canvases. She was everything Sophie was not. Where Sophie was soft, Kendra was sharp edges. Her hair was a shock of raven black, cut in an asymmetric bob. A silver ring pierced her lip, and her eyes held a spark of wild, unapologetic ambition. She stood by her massive crimson and charcoal painting, dressed in black leather pants and a silk blouse, engaging a huddle of wealthy patrons with a husky, confident laugh. Elliot found himself drifting towards her, drawn by an invisible current. "Mr. Dalton," she said, her eyes scanning him with an unnerving intensity as he approached. She didn't offer a fawning smile like most people did. Come to acquire another piece of culture to match the furniture. The question was a direct challenge, a beautiful insult wrapped in silk. He was taken aback, then intrigued. "I buy what moves me, Ms. Munro," he replied, his voice smoother than he felt. "And what moves a man like you?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. Market trends. Algorithmic predictions. Sometimes, Elliot admitted, stepping closer, it's the deviation from the algorithm that's most interesting. Their conversation that night was a jolt of electricity. She spoke of art not as a decorative asset, but as a visceral, messy, and necessary expression of chaos. She saw through his carefully constructed persona, poking and prodding at the man beneath the billionaire. For the first time in years, Elliot felt seen, not as the CEO of Nexus AI, but as a man. He left the gala with her business card in his pocket, its sharp corners pressing against his palm. He told himself it was just a professional interest, a potential investment in a promising artist. It was a lie, and he knew it. A week later, while Sophie was at her prenatal yoga class, he visited Kendra's studio in the gritty industrial Fulton Market district. The space was enormous, a converted warehouse that smelled of turpentine and linseed oil. Canvases in various states of completion were everywhere. It was a world of beautiful, vibrant chaos, the complete antithesis of his life. "I was wondering if you'd show up," Kendra said, wiping her paint-stained hands on a rag. She was even more magnetic here in her element. "Your work is compelling," he said the word, feeling inadequate. "It's honest," she countered. "It's not meant to be pretty or polite. It's meant to make you feel something." And he did feel something. Standing there, surrounded by her raw, untamed energy, he felt a dangerous, exhilarating sense of freedom. He bought a painting, a furious swirl of black and gold, but that wasn't the real transaction. The real transaction was the unspoken agreement that passed between them. The first secret meeting became a second. He would invent late-night board meetings, urgent overseas calls, manufacturing crises that required his presence at the office. Each lie was a small, sharp betrayal, and the guilt was a bitter pill he swallowed down with the adrenaline of the affair. With Kendra, he wasn't a husband or a father-to-be. He was just Elliot, a man captivated by a wild, unpredictable woman. They didn't have quiet dinners. They had fierce debates over cheap wine, in her studio, went to underground music venues, and took impulsive late-night drives along the lake, the city lights a blur. She made him feel young, reckless, and alive. Meanwhile, at home, Sophie was nesting. She'd read parenting books aloud to him, her voice soft and full of wonder. She'd place his hand on her swollen belly so he could feel their son kick. "He's got your energy, Elliot," she'd laugh. Each gentle touch, each loving smile became a fresh torment. He was living a double life, and the strain was beginning to fracture his carefully controlled world. One evening, as Sophie talked excitedly about the 3D ultrasound they had scheduled for the following week, Elliot's phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Kendra's studio. "Now. I have an idea I want to show you." "Who's that?" Sophie asked casually. "Just..." Ben Elliot lied, his heart hammering in his chest. A problem with the server farm in Dublin. Benjamin Carter was his co-founder and closest friend, his most reliable alibi. "Oh, darling, not again," Sophie said with a sigh, her hand coming to rest on his. "You work too hard. The baby and I need you." He looked at her trusting, innocent face, and a wave of self-loathing washed over him. He knew he should end it. He knew he was on a path to ruin. But the pull of Kendra's world, of that intoxicating, chaotic freedom, was too strong. "I know," he said, kissing her forehead. The kiss felt like a lie. "I'll be back before you know it. I promise." He walked out of their pristine, silent penthouse, leaving the quiet love of his pregnant wife behind, and drove into the night towards the beautiful destructive chaos that was Kendra Monroe. It was the first of countless promises he was about to break. The next 2 months were a masterclass in deception. Elliot's life split neatly into 2 opposing realities, each with its own set of rules, its own language, its own version of himself. In the daylight world, he was Elliot Dalton expectant father. He attended the 3D ultrasound, feigning awe as the ghostly image of his son flickered on the screen. He saw the tiny, perfect hands and feet, the strong, steady beat of the heart. Sophie squeezed his hand, tears of joy in her eyes. "He looks like you," she whispered. Elliot smiled, a hollow gesture that didn't reach his eyes. He felt like an imposter, a spy in his own life. The image of the sonogram was tucked into his wallet, a constant damning reminder of the life he was betraying. He played his part. He assembled the crib his engineer's mind, finding a strange, detached solace in the precision of the instructions. He nodded along as Sophie debated paint colors for the accent wall. He attended a baby shower, where he was the only man in a sea of pastel dresses and cooing women. Sophie's friends and family adored him. They saw a devoted, successful husband, the perfect provider. Only Sophie's older sister, Lauren Grant, a sharp-witted lawyer, ever seemed to look at him with a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "You seem distracted," Elliot Lauren said to him at the shower, cornering him by the gift table. "A million miles away. Just a lot on my mind with the Nexus launch," he deflected smoothly. "Right, the launch," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Make sure you're present for the main event. Sophie needs you, not your proxy." Her words were a warning shot, but one he chose to ignore. Because in the shadow world, the world of the night, he was a different man. With Kendra, he wasn't a provider. He was a conspirator. Her studio became his sanctuary and his confessional. It was where he shed the skin of Elliot Dalton, CEO and husband. They never spoke of Sophie. It was an unspoken rule. Kendra wasn't interested in his domestic life. She was interested in the raw ambition and the darkness she sensed in him. "You're terrified, aren't you?" she said to him one night, as they lay on a paint-splattered sheet on her studio floor, sharing a bottle of expensive whiskey he'd brought. "Terrified of what of them?" she said, gesturing vaguely towards the glittering city skyline, visible through her grimy window. "Of becoming one of those boring, domesticated men you see pushing strollers in the park. Your wife, the baby, the house. It's a cage. A beautiful, comfortable cage. But it's still a cage." She was voicing the very thoughts he was too ashamed to admit to himself. She didn't judge him for it. She validated it. She made his selfishness feel like a form of rebellion, his betrayal, a quest for authenticity. She was the serpent in his sterile Eden, and he willingly took the apple every single time. His business partner Ben Carter was the first to notice the tangible effects of Elliot's fractured life. Ben was the grounded operational mind behind Nexus AI, the calm to Elliot's storm. They had built the company together, and Ben knew him better than anyone. "You missed the quarterly review call with the Tokyo investors," Elliot Ben said, walking into his office and shutting the door. "That's not like you. I got tied up," Elliot said, dismissively, scrolling through his emails. "You've been tied up a lot lately," Ben pressed his expression serious. "You look exhausted. You're making sloppy mistakes. Whatever is going on, you need to get it under control. The IPO is 6 months away. Sophie's due in, 8 weeks? This is not the time to lose focus. I have it under control." Elliot snapped his defensiveness, betraying him. Ben sighed, leaning against the door. "I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you handle billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat. But right now you look like a man drowning. Is everything okay at home?" With Sophie. The direct question was a punch to the gut. "Everything's fine." Elliot lied the words, tasting like ash. Just pre-launch jitters. Ben didn't look convinced, but he dropped it, leaving Elliot alone with the suffocating weight of his lies. The pressure was mounting. He was dropping balls at work and at home. His distractedness was becoming impossible to hide. He'd forget conversations he'd had with Sophie moments earlier. He'd miss obstetrician appointments, claiming a crisis at work, only to have Sophie tell him later that it was just a routine checkup he could have easily rescheduled. Sophie, for her part, was not naive. She was gentle and trusting, but she was also deeply intuitive. She began to notice the small telltale signs of a lie, the scent of a strange perfume, turpentine, and something floral and musky that clung to his jacket, the way he guarded his phone, angling it away from her when he texted, the vague, non-committal answers about his late nights. She began to feel a creeping, cold dread. The man she loved was becoming a stranger. He was physically present, but his mind, his spirit was elsewhere. The easy intimacy they once shared was gone, replaced by a tense, fragile silence. She blamed herself at first. Maybe it was the pregnancy. Maybe she was no longer attractive to him. Maybe the stress of impending fatherhood was too much. She tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Elliot, is everything all right?" she asked one evening, as he stood staring out the penthouse window, his back to her. "You seem so far away. Are you worried about the baby? About us?" He turned his face, a carefully composed mask. "Of course not. Don't be silly. I'm just stressed with work. It'll be better after the launch." He walked over and wrapped his arms around her, but the embrace felt mechanical, hollow. He was holding her, but he wasn't there. Sophie wanted to believe him, desperately. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow, its ugly roots twisting around her heart. She confided in her sister Lauren, her voice trembling over the phone. "Something's wrong, Laurie. He's different. It's like there's a wall between us, and I don't know how to break it down." "A wall or another woman?" Lauren asked, her tone sharp and pragmatic. "Don't say that," Sophie whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He wouldn't. "Not now. Not with the baby coming." "Men are idiots," Soph Lauren said, her voice softening with pity. "And billionaires are just idiots with more opportunities. Just keep your eyes open." The breaking point was a week later. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. Elliot had promised her a special evening. He'd made a reservation at their favorite restaurant, the one where he'd proposed. Sophie spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing a beautiful maternity dress that made her feel elegant, despite her swollen ankles and the constant ache in her back. She did it for him, for them, hoping a perfect night could somehow mend the cracks that had appeared in their marriage. He called her an hour before they were supposed to leave. "Soph, sweetheart, I am so sorry." He began, his voice strained. "There's been a massive security breach. A hack. I have to be here. I don't think I can make it." Sophie's heart sank. She sat on the edge of their bed, the silk of her dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a play that had been cancelled. "Oh, okay. Is everything all right?" "It's a mess. I'll be here all night. We'll celebrate this weekend, I promise. A real celebration. I love you." The line went dead. She sat in the silent bedroom, the glittering lights of Chicago, offering no comfort. She knew with a certainty that was cold and absolute that he was lying. There was no security breach. There was just another woman. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, brutal blow to her chest that left her breathless. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect future, it was all an illusion. And as their son kicked inside her, a silent, unknowing participant in his parents' tragedy, Sophie finally allowed herself to face the devastating truth. Her husband was gone, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. For 3 days, Sophie existed in a fog of grief and denial. She went through the motions of her life, a ghost in her own home. She ate when she remembered to her appetite gone. She stared out at the city, the view that once symbolized hope, now feeling like a mockery. She had tried calling Ben Carter Elliott's partner to ask about the security breach, but her courage failed her. A part of her wasn't ready to have her worst fears confirmed. The evidence she needed came not from a dramatic confrontation, but from a mundane piece of modern life, a credit card statement. It arrived via email, and she opened it automatically, part of their domestic routine. She scanned the list of transactions, and then her eyes froze. There was the charge for the anniversary flowers Elliot had sent to her office, and right below it, a charge from 2 days prior for 25,000 tolorsalos. The vendor was listed as Monroe Gallery. Monroe. The name struck a chord. She remembered Elliot mentioning a fiery, brilliant artist he'd met at a gala months ago. Kendra Monroe. He'd bought one of her paintings, a dark, chaotic piece that now hung in his corporate office, a place she rarely visited anymore. With trembling hands, Sophie typed the name into her laptop's search bar. The gallery's website appeared, followed by articles, interviews, and photos. And there she was, Kendra Monroe, strikingly beautiful with piercing eyes and an aura of defiant confidence. In one of the photos, a candid shot from a gallery opening, she was laughing, head thrown back. Standing next to her, a possessive hand on the small of her back, was Elliot. The photo was dated the night of their anniversary. The screen blurred as tears filled Sophie's eyes. It wasn't a security breach. It was a gallery opening. He hadn't been saving his company. He had been celebrating with another woman on the night he was supposed to be celebrating their marriage. The casual intimacy in the photograph, the way he was looking at Kendra, was a dagger to Sophie's heart. The fog of grief burned away, replaced by a cold, hard rage. The passive sadness was gone, and in its place was a woman who would not be made a fool of. She would not let him destroy their family with his casual, cruel lies. That evening when Elliot came home, she was waiting for him in the living room. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She sat perfectly still on the white sofa, the laptop open on the coffee table in front of her, the damning photograph displayed on the screen. He walked in, loosening his tie, a tired sigh on his lips. What a day he started, then stopped when he saw her expression. He followed her gaze to the laptop screen. The color drained from his face. All the carefully constructed lies, all the alibis and deceptions evaporated in an instant. He was caught. Sophie. He began, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't," she said, her own voice, dangerously calm. "Don't you dare lie to me again, Elliot. Not after this." She pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "A security breach. This is your security breach." Her Elliot ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of desperation. He looked cornered, trapped. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she married, a flash of shame and regret in his eyes. She prayed he would break down, apologize, beg for forgiveness. She had already decided she would give it. For their son. For the life they had built. But he didn't. Instead, something in him shifted. The cornered animal decided to attack rather than retreat. Perhaps it was arrogance, or the intoxicating influence of Kendra's philosophy of selfish freedom. He straightened up and his expression hardened. "It's not what you think," he said, the classic, infuriating line of every guilty man. "Isn't it?" Sophie's voice rose, the calm finally cracking. "Then what is it, Elliot? What is a picture of my husband with his hands all over another woman on our wedding anniversary, What is a $25,000 charge for her art? Tell me. Explain it to me in a way that doesn't make me feel like the most naive, pathetic fool in the entire city. She's an artist, a client. He stammered the lie, weak and unconvincing even to his own ears. Stop it, Sophie screamed, finally getting to her feet, her pregnant belly a prominent shield between them. Just stop lying. For once in your life, tell me the truth. The confrontation they were having was not the one she had imagined. He wasn't apologetic. He was defensive. He was angry at her for discovering his secret. All right, fine, he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous, silent apartment. You want the truth. The truth is that I'm suffocating here. This perfect life, this perfect apartment, this perfect wife. It's not real. I can't breathe. His words were more brutal than a physical blow. Sophie recoiled, clutching her stomach, as if to protect their unborn child from the venom in his voice. You're suffocating. I'm the one carrying your son. I'm the one whose body is changing, whose life is about to be turned upside down forever, and you're the one who is suffocating with her, with Kendra. I feel alive, he confessed, the words tumbling out now cruel and honest. I feel like myself again. Not just a brand, not just a father-to-be, just me. It was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just having a physical affair. He had given his heart, his soul to another woman. He had built an entire other life, a life where she and their son had no place. So what do you want, Elliot? She asked, her voice breaking the fight, draining out of her, replaced by a profound, desolate sadness. What happens now? He looked at her, at the tears streaming down her face, at the magnificent swell of her pregnancy, at the entire future they had planned together. And he made his choice. It was the point of no return, the single moment upon which the rest of his life would pivot. I don't know, he said, his voice cold. I think I need some space. I can't do this right now. I need to get out of here. He didn't say he was leaving her. He didn't say it was over. He used the coward's words, space. But they both knew what he meant. He turned and walked towards their bedroom. Sophie stood frozen, listening to the sounds of him opening drawers, pulling a suitcase from the closet. He was packing a bag. He was actually leaving. He was choosing the affair, choosing the chaos, choosing the mistress over his family, over his pregnant wife, over his unborn son. A few minutes later, he emerged with a small overnight bag. He wouldn't look at her. He walked towards the door, his footsteps a death knell for their marriage. Elliot, please. Sophie whispered one last desperate plea. Don't do this. Think about our son. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned his head slightly, his profile etched against the hallway light. I'm sorry, Sophie, he said. The words were empty, meaningless. Then he opened the door and walked out the heavy steel door, clicking shut behind him with a terrifying finality. Sophie stood alone in the $10 million penthouse, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. A wave of pain, sharp and visceral, shot through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly, and slowly sank to the floor, the photograph of her husband and his mistress still glowing on the laptop screen, a digital tombstone for her dead marriage. Elliot drove through the city, the adrenaline from the fight coursing through his veins. He wasn't thinking about Sophie's tears or the devastating words he had spoken. He was thinking only of escape. He felt a perverse sense of liberation, as if he'd just broken out of a long-term prison sentence. The guilt was there, a low hum beneath the surface, but he pushed it down, burying it under a mountain of self-justification. He needed this. He deserved to be happy. Sophie was strong. She would be fine. He arrived at Kendra's loft, his overnight bag in hand. When she opened the door and saw him, a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. "You finally did it," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She pulled him inside her hands, tangling in his hair, her kiss fierce and possessive. "You chose freedom." The next 48 hours were a blur of manufactured bliss. Kendra declared it a celebration of his emancipation. They drank champagne straight from the bottle, ordered inexpensive food they barely touched, and made love with a desperate, frantic energy on the paint-splattered floor. Kendra was intoxicating, showering him with praise for his courage, for finally choosing an authentic life. She made him feel like a romantic hero, a man who had bravely cast off the shackles of convention rather than what he was, a cheating husband who had abandoned his 8 months pregnant wife. "We should get out of the city," she said, on the second day, her head resting on his chest. "Let's drive up to that little town on the lake. No phones, no work, no drama, just us. We can leave tonight." It sounded like the perfect escape. A way to put even more distance between himself and the wreckage he'd left behind. "Okay," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Let's go." Meanwhile, back in the silent penthouse, Sophie was unraveling. After Elliot left, the sharp pain in her abdomen had subsided into a dull, persistent ache. Her doctor had warned her that severe stress could be dangerous this late in a pregnancy. She spent the first day in a daze calling her sister Lauren, her voice a monotone whisper, as she recounted what had happened. Lauren was there within the hour, her face a mask of cold fury. "That absolute bastard," she seethed. "I'm going to ruin him, Sophie. I'm going to take him for every penny." "I don't care about the money," Sophie whispered, her hand never leaving her belly. I can't believe he left." Lauren stayed with her, forcing her to eat, making her drink water, monitoring her like a hawk. But the emotional toll was devastating. Sophie couldn't sleep. She'd close her eyes and see the photograph, see Elliot's cold expression as he walked out the door. The stress manifested as a tightening in her chest, a constant thrum of anxiety that she couldn't quell. Her body was on high alert, flooded with cortisol. On the evening of the second day, as Elliot and Kendra were packing for their lakeside getaway, Sophie felt another much sharper pain. It was a vicious, debilitating cramp that made her double over. "What is it?" Lauren asked, rushing to her side. "I don't know." Sophie gasped, her face pale with sweat. It's really bad." Then she felt a gush of fluid. Her water had broken. "Oh my God," Lauren said, her lawyerly composure shattering. Okay, we're going to the hospital. It's too early. You're only 33 weeks. Panic set in. Lauren grabbed the hospital bag that had been sitting packed and ready by the door for weeks, a happy symbol of preparedness that now felt like a harbinger of doom. As Lauren helped a crying, terrified Sophie to the elevator, her first instinct was to call Elliot. She dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Elliot, it's Lauren. Sophie's in labor. Her water broke. We're on our way to Northwestern Memorial. For God's sake, pick up your phone." She tried again. Voicemail. In Kendra's loft, Elliot's phone lit up on the counter. He saw Lauren's name, and a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He didn't want to talk to her. He didn't want to face the anger, the recriminations. He was escaping. Kendra saw him look at it. "Don't," she said, taking the phone from his hand and silencing it. "No drama. That was the deal. Whatever it is, it can wait. Your old life can wait." He let her do it. He chose ignorance. He tossed his phone into his bag and followed her out the door, turning his back on the one call that mattered more than any other in his life. The drive out of the city was tense. The initial euphoria of his escape was beginning to curdle into a sour anxiety. He kept thinking about the silenced phone call. But Kendra was radiant, playing loud music, talking animatedly about their future, about traveling about a world with no strings attached. He tried to get lost in her fantasy, but the image of Sophie's tear-streaked face was seared into his mind. Back in Chicago, the situation at the hospital was escalating. Sophie's labor was progressing far too quickly, and the baby's heart rate was becoming dangerously erratic. The stress of the past 2 days had triggered preterm labor and placental abruption, a life-threatening condition for both mother and child. The serene birthing plan Sophie had so carefully crafted was thrown out the window. The room was suddenly filled with doctors and nurses, their voices urgent, their faces grim. "We're losing his heartbeat," a nurse shouted. "We have to do an emergency C-section." Now the doctor ordered, looking at Lauren. "Where is her husband?" "He's not answering his phone," Lauren said, her own voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. They rushed a terrified Sophie towards the operating room. Lauren was left alone in the hallway, frantically dialing Elliot's number. Again and again, each unanswered call, each trip to voicemail, another nail in the coffin of his character. She called Ben Carter. "Ben, it's Lauren Grant. You need to find Elliot. Now." "Sophie's at Northwestern. She's in an emergency C-section. The baby's in distress. He's not answering his phone. Find him." Ben, who was working late at the Nexus office, felt a cold dread wash over him. He knew immediately that this was connected to Elliot's recent erratic behavior. He began a frantic search, calling Elliot's assistant, trying to track his car's GPS, anything. 3 hours later, in a quiet lakeside town, Elliot and Kendra were checking into a boutique hotel. As he brought their bags in from the car, he finally took out his phone, a sliver of responsibility piercing through his selfish haze. He saw it then. 27 missed calls from Lauren, 10 from Ben. A string of voicemails and frantic texts. His blood ran cold. He played the first voicemail from Lauren. Her panicked voice filled the quiet hotel room. "Sophie's in labor, on our way to Northwestern Memorial. Pick up your phone." He stumbled back, the world tilting on its axis. Kendra came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy white robe. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, the woman for whom he had silenced his phone, the woman for whom he had abandoned his wife in her moment of greatest need. The beautiful, liberating fantasy shattered, revealing the ugly, selfish reality beneath. He didn't even bother to pack. He grabbed his car keys and ran, leaving a bewildered Kendra standing in the hotel room. The 2-hour drive back to Chicago was the longest of his life. Every red light, every slow-moving truck was a form of torture. He was no longer a romantic hero. He was the villain of his own story, and he was driving headlong into the consequences he had created. The automatic doors of Northwestern Memorial's emergency entrance slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting Elliot into a world of controlled chaos and antiseptic air. He ran through the corridors, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum, his heart hammering a panicked rhythm against his ribs. Every face he passed, doctors, nurses, worried families, seemed to carry a silent judgment. He was a man out of place, his disheveled suit and wild eyes, a stark contrast to the grim stoicism of the hospital. He found the maternity ward on the 4th floor. Down a long, quiet corridor, bathed in sterile, fluorescent light, he saw them. Ben Carter stood with his back against the wall, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Beside him, pacing in a tight, furious circle, was Lauren. Her face was a pale, tear-streaked mask of pure rage. The moment she saw him, her pacing stopped. The air crackled with a tension so thick it felt like he was wading through water. "Where were you?" She hissed the words, slicing through the hospital's quiet hum. She stalked towards him, her fists clenched at her sides. For a terrifying second, he thought she was going to strike him, and a part of him felt he deserved it. She called you. I called you. We all called you. Where in God's name were you, Elliot? I didn't have my phone on. He stammered the excuse, sounding pathetic and flimsy even to his own ears. It was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that he had willingly silenced it, choosing ignorance over duty, pleasure over love. You didn't have your phone on, Lauren repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh that was closer to a sob. While my sister was being rushed into an operating room while your son was fighting for his life, you were… what, too busy? Too important? Lauren, that's enough, Ben interjected softly, stepping forward and placing a restraining hand on her arm. His own eyes, when they met, Elliot's, were filled not with anger, but with a deep, bottomless disappointment that was somehow worse. How is she? Elliot asked, his voice raw, turning his desperate gaze to Ben. Sophie and the baby, is the baby okay? Before anyone could answer, a woman in blue scrubs approached them, her expression calm and professional, yet etched with a weariness that spoke of long, difficult nights. Mr. Dalton, she said, her voice even. I'm Dr. Walsh, the head of neonatology. Perhaps we can talk in the family consultation room. The formal invitation sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread through him. Good news wasn't delivered in private rooms. Lauren shot him a look of pure loathing before following the doctor. Ben gave his shoulder a grim, hesitant squeeze and motioned for him to follow. The room was small and impersonal, furnished with a small table and a few uncomfortable chairs. The silence was absolute. Your wife Sophie is stable. Dr. Walsh began getting straight to the point. The surgery was difficult and she lost a significant amount of blood, but she is recovering. Your son was born at 8:14 p.m. A flicker of hope ignited in Elliot's chest. A son. He was a father. He's alive. He's okay. Dr. Walsh held his gaze, her own unwavering. He is alive, but I'm afraid he is not okay. She took a breath, the clinical detachment in her voice, doing nothing to soften the blow of her next words. Your son was born at 33 weeks under extreme fetal distress. During labor, your wife experienced a severe placental abruption, which cut off his oxygen supply for a critical period before we could deliver him. We were able to resuscitate him, but he has suffered what is called a hypoxic ischemic brain injury. The medical terms hung in the air, foreign and menacing. I don't understand, Elliot said, shaking his head, a fog of denial settling over him. What does that mean, a hypoxic injury? It means there was a lack of oxygen to his brain, the doctor clarified, her voice, gentle but firm, refusing to let him hide from the reality. The damage is significant, and I'm sorry to say irreversible. He has been diagnosed with a severe form of spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. It's the most debilitating form of the condition. She paused, letting the weight of the diagnosis sink in. Lauren was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. What does that mean for him? For his life? Elliot whispered the question, feeling impossibly heavy. It means he will face profound, lifelong challenges, Dr. Walsh said. His motor functions will be severely impaired. He will almost certainly never be able to walk or even sit up on his own. His ability to speak will be compromised, and he will have significant cognitive impairments. He will be completely dependent on others and require constant 24-hour care for the rest of his life. Never walk, never talk. Constant care for the rest of his life. The words were like individual hammer blows against the thinning shield of his denial. This wasn't a problem to be solved. This was a life sentence. His son's life sentence. His mind, always racing for solutions for causes and effects, grasped for an explanation. The abruption. What causes something like that? Was it just bad luck? Dr. Walsh's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flickered to Lauren, a silent, knowing exchange passing between the two women. When she looked back at Elliot, her gaze was piercing. Placental abruption can have many causes, Mr. Dalton, but it is very often associated with severe, acute maternal stress or physical trauma. Severe acute maternal stress. The phrase echoed in the silent room, and in that instant, Elliot's entire world collapsed. The clinical explanation became a direct accusation. He saw it all in a horrifying split-second flashback Sophie's face when she saw the photograph. The ugly, selfish words he'd hurled at her. "I'm suffocating here." The final, devastating image of her standing alone as he walked out the door. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had broken her body. He had triggered this catastrophe. He had done this to his son. The floor seemed to drop out from under him, and he gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling, the room filled with a roaring sound that was only in his ears. "Can I see him?" He managed to choke out the words, tasting like poison. Dr. Walsh led him to the neonatal intensive care unit. After scrubbing his hands raw, he was allowed inside the quiet, dim room, a sanctuary of beeping machines and hushed whispers. And there, in a clear plastic isolette, under a warming light, was the tiniest, most fragile human he had ever seen. His son, Leo. Wires and tubes snaked from his impossibly small body, connecting him to a bank of monitors that displayed his life in cold-colored lines and numbers. His skin was almost translucent, his chest rising and falling in shallow machine-assisted breaths. This tiny broken child who had never known anything but a warm, safe darkness had been violently thrust into a world of pain and struggle because of him. He was supposed to be his protector, and instead he had been his destroyer. Elliot reached out a trembling hand and pressed it against the hard, cold plastic of the isolette, a barrier he could not cross. It was a perfect metaphor for the chasm he had opened between himself and his son, a distance that could never be bridged. The carefully constructed dam of his composure finally broke, and he collapsed against the incubator, his body racked with deep, silent, gut-wrenching sobs of a man who has just witnessed the full, irreversible scale of his own damnation. Hours later, after he had pulled himself together into a fragile semblance of a man, a nurse told him Sophie was awake and able to receive a visitor. He walked to her room, each step heavier than the last, his soul weighted down with a guilt so profound it felt physical. He paused at her door, his hand hovering over the handle, a coward to the very end. He pushed the door open. She was lying in the bed looking small and lost in the sterile white sheets. The vibrant maternal glow she'd had for months was gone, replaced by a grey, depleted pallor. An IV line was taped to her hand. When he entered, she didn't turn to him. She just continued to stare at the blank wall opposite her bed, as if it were more interesting than the man who had ruined her life. "Sophie," he began, his voice a broken whisper. "There are no words. I am so sorry." A long, painful silence stretched between them. Then she finally spoke, her voice flat, hollowed out, utterly devoid of the warmth he had always taken for granted. "Sorry doesn't fix his brain, Elliot." She turned her head slowly, and when her eyes met his, he recoiled. They were the eyes of a stranger, empty of love, empty of pity, filled only with a calm, settled, and eternal hatred. "It doesn't make his limbs work," she continued, her voice never rising. "It doesn't give him the life that you stole from him, from us." Desperate, he fell back on the only solution he knew. "I'll fix this," he pleaded, the words sounding foolish and arrogant as soon as they left his mouth. "I swear, Sophie, I'll hire the best doctors in the world, the best therapists. I'll build a new neurological wing on this hospital in his name. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." A small, ugly sound escaped her lips, a bitter, humorless laugh that died in her throat. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is one of your corporate problems you can just throw money at until it goes away. This is my son's life. This is my life, and you will not be a part of it." Her words were a final verdict delivered with the cold finality of a judge's gavel. "I want a divorce. You will provide for Leo, of course. Your money is the one useful thing you have left to offer. You will set up a trust that ensures he has every single thing he ever needs for the rest of his life. But you will not be his father. You will be a bank account. You forfeited the right to be anything more when you silenced your phone." There was nothing left to say. He had been tried, convicted, and sentenced. He nodded numbly and backed out of the room, leaving her alone with the pieces of the life he had shattered. He drove on autopilot, his mind a black hole of grief and shame. He didn't go to the penthouse. It wasn't his home anymore. He ended up outside Kendra's loft, drawn by some dark last-ditch instinct. He needed to see the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything. He found her inside her suitcases, packed, and standing by the door, the vibrant, chaotic studio that had once felt like a haven of freedom, now just looked cheap and transient. "Elliot, where have you been?" she demanded, though her tone was more annoyed than concerned. "I was about to leave. I thought you'd just abandoned me." Sophie had the baby. He said, his voice a monotone. He felt disconnected, like he was watching a scene from a movie. "It's a boy. There were complications. He's not well. He's never going to be well." He watched her face for any flicker of empathy, any sign of shared humanity. He found none. Her brow furrowed, not with sympathy but with a sharp, panicked calculation. "Complications?" she repeated, her voice losing its warmth. "What kind of complications? Is this a long-term thing?" "It's a lifelong thing," he confirmed numbly. Kendra let out a long theatrical sigh and ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Look, Elliot," she said, her voice shifting into a cool, dismissive tone. "I am truly sorry to hear that. It's a tragedy. But this is not what I signed up for." He just stared at her, the final pieces of his self-delusion crumbling away. "What are you talking about?" "This," she exclaimed, waving a hand around to encompass him, his grief, the entire ugly situation, the baby mama drama, the hospital visits, a sick kid. "Elliot, my life is about my art. It's about passion and freedom, not baggage. I was attracted to the powerful, rebellious billionaire who was breaking out of his cage. I'm not interested in the guilt-ridden single dad with a mountain of medical bills and emotional problems. This is just far too much of a mess for me." She was the serpent, and he had been the fool. She hadn't wanted his soul. She had just wanted to play with his power. Now that the game had turned real and ugly, she was cashing out. She picked up her suitcase. "It was fun while it lasted," she said with a shrug, as if they were talking about a brief vacation. "Good luck with everything." She walked out the door, closing it softly behind her, leaving him standing utterly alone in the center of the room that had been the epicenter of his life's destruction. He had chosen the mistress over his pregnant wife. He had traded a universe of love for a cheap, hollow thrill, and the consequence wasn't just a memory he had to forget. It was a son whose broken body would forever be a monument to his father's failure. It was the enduring image of his wife's eyes, filled with a righteous hatred he had painstakingly earned. It was the deafening silence of a life stripped bare, leaving only a hollow man in a gilded cage, with nothing but his money and his regret for company. Elliot Dalton's story serves as a chilling, unforgettable reminder that our choices are the architects of our lives, and some foundations once shattered can never be rebuilt. He chased a fleeting feeling of freedom, only to chain himself to a lifetime of regret. The tragic irony is that the responsibility he fled from is nothing compared to the crushing, lifelong weight of the consequence he created. His son, Leo, became the silent, constant symbol of a single selfish decision, a choice made in a moment that will echo for an eternity. He will forever see his wife's justified hatred in the eyes of strangers, and hear his own guilt in the beeping of medical machines. If this story of betrayal and its devastating fallout moved you, please let us know in the comments below. What do you think is the most tragic part of Elliot's downfall? Every life is filled with choices, and stories like these help us reflect on our own. Please like this video, share it with someone who appreciates powerful real-life drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the deepest corners of human nature.